Oh my God.
911. 1 year ago, a frantic 911 call.
It's 2 Blake Street.
What's the address?
Please hurry. It's 2 Blake Street. There's a fire.
For what at the time seemed like an ordinary house fire.
The TV, I don't know. My son, a stepson, is in his room, and I don't know. He did something with the TV. I was sleeping. I fell asleep.
Put this Waterbury home, a stepmother, and her stepson in the national spotlight.
Yes, we need an ambulance, please.
Okay.
Please, we need an ambulance.
Ma'am, all right, you said something's on fire and now you need an ambulance. What's going on there?
Yes, his room.
Where is he injured?
I don't know. I don't know. He's kind of passed out. He's out of it. Please.
Over the next month, investigators worked to unravel what happened inside what they call a house of horrors.
That room did have exterior locks on it and a number of different styles of exterior locks.
A 32-year-old man told police his stepmother held him captive for more than 20 years.
There's an adult that was 5'9" and 68 pounds. There's some apparent orthopedic issues. The room was very small.
As investigators revealed more details.
During an interview with the victim throughout the years, it appeared that the locks increased in security levels as time progressed.
And the case headed to court.
I would just ask that people keep an open mind and let this case work its way through the court system and allow Miss Sullivan to get a fair trial.
Family members.
I just saw it on the news. I didn't put 2 and 2 together. Saturday, our mom texted me, get a hold of me ASAP. Okay, what's up? That was your brother. No, it wasn't.
Neighbors.
I never in a million years would have thought that that was happening across the street from me.
And people around the country wondered how something like this could happen.
I've been out here I don't know how many times with the dogs cutting grass. If you would have just tapped on the window and said, "Help me," I could have helped him.
I'm Annette Montgomery. Thank you for joining us for our special, The Waterbury Captivity Case 1 year later. Over the last year, this case captured nationwide attention. Now we are revisiting it and the people involved. We are also asking 2 questions that many of you have been wondering. Is recovery possible for the man who now goes by S? And what can we do to prevent something like this from happening again? First, Fox 61's Alicia Hercules takes us back to the moment this all started and shows us how this case has played out in court so far.
Since Kimberly Sullivan was arrested in March 2025, we've been in the courtroom as prosecutors present their evidence, and Sullivan's team fights the charges against her. And one expert we spoke with says this case has a long road ahead.
Please hurry. It's 2 Blake Street. There's a fire.
On the night of February 17th, 2025, Kimberly Sullivan made a 911 call to report a fire. In the home that night, Sullivan and her stepson, who now goes by the name S. During the frantic phone call, Sullivan tells the dispatcher her stepson was hurt and in his room.
No, I don't know. He's kind of passed out. He's out of it. Please.
Come on, come down.
When first responders arrived, Sullivan was standing outside of the home.
Who else is in the house? Who else is in here?
My stepson is in here.
In this body cam video, Sullivan yells for S to come outside. Moments later, firefighters are seen carrying S to an ambulance. He later told first responders he started the fire to gain his freedom. For more than 20 years, he says Sullivan held him captive in an 8-by-9-foot room. He also told first responders he had to drink from a toilet and that there was always a lock on the door. First responders noted that S, who is in his early 30s and 5'9", was emaciated and weighed just 68 pounds. They also observed that he had matted hair and rotted teeth. Police later released several photos taken from inside the home after the fire that showed dirty floors and a cluttered living space. One photo even shows a lock outside of the room where investigators say Sullivan kept S. Sullivan was arrested on March 12, 2025. She was charged with assault, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, cruelty to persons, and reckless endangerment, and pleaded not guilty to the charges. Sullivan is represented by criminal defense attorney Jonas Kaloidis. He maintains his client is innocent.
She's done nothing wrong, and The evidence against her is lacking, to say the least.
During a hearing on October 3rd, prosecutors filed a motion to block the defense from accessing the medical records, address, and name of Sullivan's stepson. Colloidis objected to that.
He's making these allegations. He's going to have to take that stand. He's going to be cross-examined. There's no hiding.
Prosecutors argued releasing the records could put S's safety in jeopardy. Later that same month, a judge agreed to release the records to the defense.
It's something that is shared with defendants in every case. My client doesn't even want to know where he is. I'm not even going to tell her the address. She doesn't need to know it for her own personal self. But if I need to discuss it with her, I should have that option.
Colloidis also filed a motion to remove Sullivan's GPS tracker, but a judge denied the request. Jim Bergen, a criminal defense attorney who is not connected to this case, says the national attention this story has gotten is not surprising.
Everybody's attention to this case is appropriate. It's just, you read about it and you almost don't want to think it's possible.
Due to the situation and nature of the charges, Bergen says Sullivan and Colloidis have a long legal battle ahead.
If I had to bet right now, I'd be betting on a trial.
If the case goes to trial, there would be a lot of evidence and testimony for a jury to consider. If S did take the stand, Bergen says he'd be a compelling and key witness whose testimony would weigh heavily on a jury.
They're going to be looking to see whether, beyond a reasonable doubt, there were some things she did that were really criminal. And there's enough charges that she could go down on any one of them.
Colloidis has said several times that they have every intention of fighting these charges and proving his client's innocence. Sullivan is expected to have another pretrial hearing in mid-March. In studio, Alicia Hercules, Fox 61.
Shortly after the case broke, we found out S had a family outside of the Blake Street home who was searching for him long before his escape. Fox 61's Jamel Johnson sat back down with the sister of S to revisit the case from the beginning from her perspective and see where things stand with her and her brother right now.
S says he gained his freedom on February 17th, 2025 from the Blake Street home. That happened to be the day also that Heather Tessman gained back her brother. But a year later, she sits infuriated with the system designed to protect him, as she believes it's put him in more danger and shields the person he accused of holding him captive.
It's not something that happens in real life. You know, it's like a true crime show, or like, I don't know. It's just insane to think that real people are capable of doing these horrific things.
On the surface, Heather Tessman was another viewer who was forming an opinion through the horrors shown on her TV.
Kimberly, why did you?
That was before she later realized her connection to the case went much deeper.
I didn't put two and two together. Saturday, our mom texted me, get a hold of me ASAP. Okay, what's up? That was your brother. No, it wasn't.
And now a year later, that disbelief still reigns supreme. But an array of emotions have also made themselves at home.
In my mind, I just get kind of angry and depressed. You know, I want to be able to support him from afar, if that makes sense. It's a lot of very mixed emotions.
Since the case made headlines, Kimberly Sullivan physically has only been in court a handful of times. Other times, it's just her defense team or a last-minute postponed date, much to the frustration of Tessman and other supporters of S.
I am going consistently. I haven't been to the last two because of time off constraints. Yeah, but it's so hard to like plan to go, because these things get canceled at the last minute. The times get switched at the last minute. They're not sending out notifications until like 4 p.m. or 6:40 p.m. the day before or day of, and it's hard to plan around that.
Inconvenient hearing scheduling is just one complaint in a long list Tessman has since the case started. Several court rulings have went in favor of Sullivan, including her cell phone being returned, a lifted ban on returning to the Blake Street home, and her defense team regaining access to court documents that reveal the victim's new name and location where he is receiving care.
I don't think it's being handled very well at all, because like I said, the court cases are being moved. She's not required to show up to a lot of these, which is insane. It's horrific. you know, he went through so much, and for the courts to just be like, okay, yeah, here's your new name and where you're at, and we're gonna let your abuser know. So it's just kind of a nightmare.
A nightmare that's been compounded by Tessman's lack of success to contact her brother despite her efforts, which makes her wonder if there is a much deeper issue that's stopping their long-awaited reunion.
It's been radio silent. I did introduce myself via text to his advocate, and I got back very, like, muted, not really any information at all. I'm not entitled to anything. I would have liked to be able to be there for him and support him.
Tessman seems to be just as much in the dark as the rest of the public. Since S's first and only statement he released in April of last year, nothing further has been said from him, his caregivers, or those who are working closely to help him receive justice. Part of S's statement says, "I was held prisoner in my home from the time I was taken out of 4th grade at age 11 until 2 months ago at age 31 when I purposely set the fire that helped set me free." Much has already been said that tells part of the story of the abuse I endured. Someday, perhaps, my whole story will be told.
That's all anybody's publicly heard from him, which is fine if that's what he wants. But is that what he wants? That's my issue.
Tessman was just a kid herself when she last laid eyes on her brother.
I think I was officially adopted by that point, but Tracy and Craig brought him to my house for like a visit. My mom's actually got a few pictures from that day, so it's very, very nice. But he was just a newborn, so tiny.
Though she has yet to reconnect with S, Tessman and her biological mother, Tracy Valloran, have strengthened their relationship over the years.
It's just disgusting that she's allowed to be on the streets right now.
Before S made his alleged escape, Tessman and Valloran worked to find him online, and since he's been receiving care, have bonded over bringing justice to the situation.
Either of us are available when the other one calls or texts. It's, you know, she's busy, I'm busy. There's not a ton going on right now, so both of us are trying to distract ourselves with like work, and that seems to be pretty effective.
We reached out to Valloran as well, who declined to do an interview, but did say in a text message, "My first concern is my son. In the past year, we have seen that the state and the court system have no concern whatsoever about the safety or well-being of the victim. They have shown that by allowing the person/people who have kept him prisoner all this time to know where he is and what he chose as his new name." It's a sentiment that's shared by Tessman. For this family, the past year has been filled with hurt, anger, and regret.
The house on Blake Street's like half a mile from where my mom lives right now, and you know, every day I'm like, I should have gone and knocked on the door, beaten the wall down or something, but that's hindsight.
It's 2020. The same can't be said about foresight though, but what hasn't changed is the way Tessman imagines a future reunion with her long lost brother.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring him to like all sorts of, you know, try all sorts of food, see what he likes, see what he doesn't like, expose him to movies and music and books. Everything he missed.
Tessman and her mother remain committed to seeing justice carried out for their brother and son, and still look forward to a potential reunion with him. As far as the court case goes, it's still a long road ahead until trial, as both sides are still in the evidence gathering phase. But by the next court date, both sides hope to be that one step closer to the pre-trial phase. Sullivan and her team continue to maintain her innocence throughout, and they believe she has a strong defense in this case. In Waterbury, Jamel Johnson, Fox 61.
When we decided to revisit this case, we wanted to pose two questions. After decades of alleged abuse and isolation, is healing possible? And what does that healing actually look like?
For survivors of even the most extreme and prolonged trauma, Dr. Jennifer Lusa, the Associate Vice President of Intensive Treatment at the Village for Families and Children, says recovery is possible.
With amazing treatment, what happens is it becomes more of a memory as opposed to an experience that's happening, so that it makes it easier to kind of just go to sleep, go through your life, talk about it without coming undone, about disassociating any of those things. That's the difference between fully recovering from trauma and still living in it.
Which means a life defined by growth, not captivity, is within reach.
And a person can go on to kind of fully recover, live a productive life, self-sufficient, independent, happy, interpersonal relationship, not a problem. It's definitely possible.
That life that doesn't erase the abuse and neglect they experienced.
They will still have long-term impact in terms of their interpersonal relationships, their ability to manage their emotions and regulate their emotions, like problem-solving skills, like the things that we take for granted would be struggles for them.
But with the right systems in place.
We call it EMDR, or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, are two of the therapies that they recommend that have been found to be very effective with folks who had extreme trauma.
Dr. Lusa says instead of reliving their trauma, victims can begin to release it.
With EMDR, it's not necessarily talk therapy, and so a lot of the work that happens internally, and it's like the brain kind of healing itself.
And instead of being trapped in it.
And so it makes it very tolerable because you can process through what you've been through without having to actually talk about it. And
they begin to process it.
With therapy and support, they can then start to create the identity that they want, not the one that was given to them.
This case had eyes from across the country on Waterbury, shocked, intrigued, and heartbroken by what unfolded in front of them. It also had thousands of people ask, how in the world could this happen? Fox 61's Stephen Reel spoke with Waterbury leaders about what they witnessed 1 year ago and their role to help make sure something like this doesn't happen again.
What was your reaction to when the news first came out about this case?
I don't know how else to put it. It was just a horrific story. And to think that there was someone on a street that I would have gone by lots of times over the 20 years or so that was locked in there and being treated that way, it was just an awful realization.
It's horrible. You can't even fathom that somebody would do that to their child.
How could this happen? There were warning signs. Why those red flags were ignored is still up in the air. We still don't have those answers.
There was a lot of national attention on Waterbury.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I wish it had been for better things. It's never the best thing to have the national attention be something like this. And in some cases, it was just a little bit overwhelming, that so many people were interested. On the other hand, it was nice because all of that national attention brought out a lot of support from across the country. It still indicates that people have a heart, there's a lot of sympathy, and when they see something like this, they want to try to step up and do what they can to help.
There are people who look at lawmakers like yourself, who look at leaders like yourself, and ask the question, how could this happen under your watch? What would you want to say to them?
Well, it has nothing to do with us. Again, it's a sick individual, and so I think our responsibility is to get as much of the information as we can and try to do the best we can to prevent it from ever happening.
The ball was dropped somewhere. There were reports that the individual was eating out of a trash can. There were reports that several individuals reported his physical appearance. And ultimately, when his mother took him out of school, he never returned. So my biggest question that remains unanswered is, where is the documentation?
We're slowly understanding how it happened. We're going to learn more when this case ultimately goes to trial, if it does, and there'll be evidence back and forth. But these are just things that happen. We live in a society in which, as much as we think otherwise right now, we don't have Big Brother watching all of the time.
These kind of things happen. That kind of feels like a little bit of a kind of brush off of everything.
You want to protect everyone, you want to protect children, but you can't be, I don't think it's possible for anyone to be everywhere 24/7. I mean, bad things do happen in the world. That is unfortunately a fact of our society. For the most part, the society is designed to operate under the assumption that parents and caregivers are looking out for their children. So these are anomalies when you find a parent, or the father in this case, or a stepmother, who really don't have the best interests of the children at heart.
So is anything going to change going into this legislative session?
That's a great question. While I do not sit on the Children's Committee or the Education Committee, I'm hopeful that they're going to revisit this. I know that there's been a lot of talk around homeschooling, but I think that the focus right now should be on, again, the reporting mechanisms and why the ball was dropped.
I haven't seen much, but again, it's very complicated. I just proposed a bill with Representative Paletta about DCF and kids in school with substantiated cases to see if we could at least help follow some things. However, if someone's going to do that, they're going to do it, and nothing is going to stop them from being an animal.
So as of now, there's really nothing that's changed at the state level. I have this example of somebody who was lost in the system somehow, and so if we had had more oversight, more regulation of the homeschoolers, we might have been able to resolve all of it. But I also understand their point of view, which is that, you know, they don't want to be regulated.
Unfortunately, it's not just as easy as that. There are a lot of parts to it, pieces to that puzzle, but if we can get started and start putting those pieces into place, hopefully, God willing, that would never happen again.
This bill would be that first step then?
It would be a first step.
This individual was clearly malnourished, clearly having issues at home, and it just fell by the wayside, and he couldn't escape on his own. It's very troubling. It's a very troubling case.
How does that make you feel? Because if this was his last line of trying to be saved, that's pretty depressing.
Absolutely. I would imagine that it's going to have dire consequences on him for the rest of his life, and I hope that the people are brought to justice that caused this.
Emotionally, it's draining. I can see my own child in that. I think, my God, how can you do that, you know?
What would you want to tell S if you could talk to him right now?
We're very sorry that all of this happened. It's an awful thing. But there's still a lot of opportunity for him out there. But, hope we understand that people really do care about him. A lot of people want to see him do really well. It's hard to forget all of this, but there is a future that's out there, and he can definitely take advantage of that.
And Annette, from what lawmakers told me, there are basically two camps right now with how people want to have this situation addressed. One of them you heard earlier was reform homeschooling versus the other camp, which is change how the Department of Children and Families does operate.
And Stefan, why wasn't anything done last legislative session? I know it happened pretty early in the year.
Yeah, so I did ask that question to Representative Paletta, and he told me that unfortunately it was just simply not early enough. Yes, we did know that this fire happened in February, but the news around this didn't really break until March, and by then it had passed the deadline and it was too late to file a bill to target the root of what actually happened in Waterbury.
And anything from the representatives you spoke with?
Not at this point. This year's a little bit different. I need to mention that first because the bills need to come from a committee and can't just come from a singular lawmaker like you might expect. Now, you heard it earlier. Zupkis said that she and Paletta were working on a bill, and at the time of the interview, Zupkis told me that a bill number had not been assigned at that time. I waited a little bit of time, asked them again, both Zupkis and Paletta's team. They told me that a number hasn't been assigned still. So we'll have to wait and see.
We will. And Stefan, I know you mentioned homeschooling regulations, Connecticut being just one of a small number of states without an explicit framework for homeschooling oversight. Let's take a look at when and if that will change.
The issue of concern in Connecticut, and what we know for a fact, is that there are families, and they're not one-offs, that have used the pretense of homeschooling, the lack of any framework where school districts follow up, to hide their children from public view and abuse and neglect them. That is not a theory. It is not a possibility. It has happened over and over and over again.
1 year after the Waterbury captivity case reignited debate surrounding homeschool regulations. Sarah Egan with the Center for Children's Advocacy and the former child advocate for the state says the law has not changed.
Connecticut remains one of a minority of states, probably about 10 in the country, that does not have an explicit framework.
Egan points out the issue is not homeschooling itself. It's the absence of a clear system. And that lack of clarity, Egan says, can limit the Department of Children and Families.
The Child Welfare Agency, though, is only authorized to investigate a report of a reasonable suspicion that a child has been abused or neglected.
Superintendents across the state say they also want the state law to change.
Fran Rabinowitz, the head of the Superintendents Association, has long pushed for some change here to clarify the state's expectation of what school districts should do to fulfill that responsibility.
The issue is when a child is homeschooled in Connecticut, when families choose to homeschool their child, there are no set regulations.
Fran Rabinowitz says districts often lose contact entirely.
I had many students when I was superintendent in Bridgeport, especially, where they were chronically absent, and then when staff called, they said we're homeschooling, and that's the end of it. So we have no further contact with the student when the family says they're homeschooled. And so the mandated reporters, such as teachers, etc., don't have eyes on the student to do any type of reporting.
Rabinowitz stresses this is not an attack on homeschooling.
There are some families who are homeschooling their children who are doing an excellent job. So I'm not coming out and saying homeschooling is bad. What I'm saying is we need regulations around homeschooling.
Those regulations could include mandatory registration and check-ins with families.
The check-in once a year can be a state test, or it could be a portfolio check-in. That would be a burden on a school district that could not be integrated without additional resources.
For Egan, the core issue is clarity.
So having a clearer framework for, hey, these are the rules that districts are supposed to follow, these are the requirements for parents, right, creates much bit more clarity around role and responsibility under the law for the school district and for DCF.
Egan says Connecticut doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. Nearly every state around us, including Massachusetts and Rhode Island, has some form of homeschool framework in place. That can include required notice to districts and annual check-ins, as Rabinowitz mentioned. Other regulations, record keeping, and a proposed curriculum. You may be wondering how S is doing today. We did not try to reach out to him to respect his privacy and recovery process. We know that there were local organizations working with him, including Safe Haven of Greater Waterbury, which supports victims of domestic violence. They set up a fundraiser which raised more than $300,000 in 5 months. Safe Haven says all of the money has been sent directly to S to be used for medical and dental care, therapy, housing, and legal fees. As we mentioned earlier, back in April 2025, S released his first and only statement. At the time, he said he was doing much better and was stronger. He also said he was beginning the process of reclaiming his life. Thank you for joining us for our special Waterbury captivity case 1 year later. As this case continues to play out in court, we will keep you updated on Fox 61 online and on fox61.com and on Fox 61 Plus.